Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions and answer them here in video format. A lot of questions to get into, so we're just going to get started with PG7, who says this. Says, the tackle depth in the second round is not great. Should we double dip at 6 and 24 and grab a wide receiver in rounds 2 and 3 like KC Concepcion or Denzel Boston? I think that remains an option. Here's something that I have not heard a lot of people ponder that I think more people should ponder. Maybe the Browns stay at 6 and move up from 24. Maybe that's what they do. Like, if the Browns can find a way to move up from, let's say, 24 to 12, would you not consider it? If you could leave this draft with a tackle you had in your top 10 of prospects and a wide receiver you have in your top 10 of prospects, let's say it's Monroe Freeling and Mekhi Lemon or Francis Mauigoa and Mekhi Lemon or Carnell Tate or Jalen Tyson. If you could lead the draft with those two, would you not be happy about what you accomplished? Now, what would it cost to move up from 24 to 12? Probably talking about a second rounder. Maybe a couple of your day 3 picks on top of that. But it's something to consider. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about the Browns moving up from 24. But I think there are a couple of things that could trigger them moving up from 24. I think Mekhi Lemon could trigger them moving up from 24. So as much as we're talking about trading back from 6, maybe 24 ends up being a little bit earlier than we think if the price is right. Because a lot of teams are talking about trading back. And when a lot of teams are talking about trading back, that means the price for trading up is cheap. So might be one of those situations where we're underestimating that, and maybe the Browns see an opportunity there that could be taken advantage of. So I don't mind the idea of double dipping at tackle if you can get one at 6 and 24. If you trade up and try to double dip at tackle, you want to get Mauigoa and Monroe Freeling, okay. I'm not going to be upset at that. But, you know, I do wonder how likely it is that the Browns just sit there at 24. Because I don't know. The more I think about it, the less I think they're going to stay at 24. Next question comes from Tracy. Tracy, who I believe is on a streak right now, has either been on Hot Takes or Q&A for like the last couple of months. Big shout out Tracy635. Tracy says this. What are the chances of the Browns waiting out for a Justin Fields release by the Jets post June 1st, then simply targeting him as their main QB addition? Here's the thing. He's not going to be the only quarterback that's likely to be released post June 1st. Kyler Murray might be released post June 1st. Tua Tagovailoa might be dealt with by post June 1st. A lot of the quarterbacks, Geno Smith probably cut day 1 of free agency, right? I think he's probably going to be cut fairly early. They've already put the word out that they're going to cut him. So I don't think he's going to be designated to post June 1st, but he might. A lot of guys who might be designated post June 1st, which means that either the Browns sign somebody who can't officially join the team until June 1st, or the Browns wait till after the draft to go after what might be their starting quarterback. We'll see what happens. But I do think it's a possibility that they do that. The next question comes from Deuce, who says this. Hey, Quincy, I know most only want to talk about the trade possibilities with the 6th pick. Oh, you read my mind. Could you see us utilizing 24 and a pick for a trade for a star receiver Could use 39 to snag another piece on the offensive line. Thanks for the daily content. I don't know if the Browns do that. If you look, and I think Daniel Fuise is the one who brought this up on Twitter. If you look at the Browns and Andrew Berry's history, and when they've traded for a wide receiver, they were all in situations where the team, regardless of what happened the following season, that offseason were in a win-now mode, right? So you look at the Amari Cooper trade, that was the same offseason they went after Deshaun Watson. If you look at the Jerry Jeudy trade, that was the same season they went all in on Deshaun Watson and changing the offense for Deshaun Watson. You look at most of the moves they've made for a wide receiver. It coincides with them feeling like they're one or two things away from being a championship contender, which kind of tells me how they view the position, where they feel like the position is not a fundamental building block to get to where they want to. It's more of a cherry on top, the icing on the cake. So given that they are at the beginning of this process, right, they put a lot of resources into the defense. They've just started putting resources into the offense. I think they're at the foundation of this cake that they're trying to make. That is the offense. And I think wide receiver is something they see as a cherry on top, the icing in their team building philosophy. And I wouldn't be surprised if those pieces came later in this process. I think they're going to have a lot of focus on the trenches, but wide receiver, maybe if they get done with the trenches, they can focus on wide receiver. But I think that will probably be one of the last things they focus on is wide receiver, or making such a gigantic move for a wide receiver. Because as you look at the team building philosophy of Andrew Berry, I don't think he's ever emphasized the position greatly. Now, it might just be a coach thing. It might be a Kevin Stefanski thing. And we've seen that different coaches change the priority for Andrew Berry. For years, I thought Andrew hated the defensive tackle position. But then you bring in Jim Schwartz, and all of a sudden, Andrew Berry's willing to draft a defensive tackle in the top 5. What coaches want changes the priorities of what Andrew drafts. So maybe Todd Monken changes that. But we'll see. You know, you look at Todd Monken's history, it's not really the most wide receiver-led history either. So, you know, I mean, you look at Georgia and Baltimore exclusively, there's not a lot of great wide receivers there. So maybe he's aligned with that thinking as well. You know what I mean? So I don't know if they make a big move for a wide receiver specifically this cycle. I think maybe if they feel like they're 1-2 moves away, they make that move. But I don't think they make that move right now. Robbie says this. Hey, Q, what are some positions in need for the Browns that are going untalked about? Secondary. I think we haven't really talked about what the Browns need in the secondary, and I think sometimes we talk about it in some basic terms, but the Browns need a free safety. This draft has a couple of free safeties. I think Genesis Smith, AJ Holsey, right? It's debatable whether Caleb Downs is a true free safety or not. I know people have thrown out Ed Reed for him, and he's a good playmaker on the ball, but I don't know if he's the space taker that it is. Like, maybe this is more of a Kyle Hamilton situation where he moves around a lot and not really a true free safety in the league. You know, I think there's a discussion to be had there about how useful that could be for the Browns when they already have on the payroll Grant Delpit. Like, do you think that Caleb Downs will be that much better than Grant Delpit that it's worth making that move? Or do you think Grant Delpit can handle a switch to free safety, which has been a problem for Grant? My theory is that Grant got, now I don't want to say he got it because people are going to start saying it, but Grant sometimes loses focus in the secondary, and I think that's why he hasn't panned out as a free safety. Athletically, he can do it, but it takes a lot of focus to be able to play at that position. It's like being in the outfield, and some kids can't be in the outfield, right? But we'll see what they do there. But I think the secondary, they need corners, backup corners, slot corners, and a free safety. I think those are the big things that they need right now. Doctor says this. How crazy is Andrew Berry if he uses our first round picks on the offensive line and then addresses wide receiver at pick 39? I don't think it's that crazy. I really don't think it's that crazy. But I'm just wondering how much. I know the internet and Browns fans really want a wide receiver in this draft. I wonder how much they feel like that's the case. I really do. Croquette says this. Can you help me understand the tension between the idea that Monken is a great offensive mind because he's excellent at utilizing what's available to him, and the constant refrain I hear from people covering the Browns that he's probably going to go out and find people like what he had in Baltimore, especially seem to hear people sound as if he needs Pat Ricard or needs Rashard Bateman style wide receivers. Both these guys were in Baltimore before he got there. So how do we know what type of player he would choose in the building in his own offense and roster as a head coach? I think you got some very valid points to this question, right? Like a lot of what people are talking about with Todd is he's adaptable. That being said, there are some concepts that Todd likes to go to a lot, and there is a specific skill set that is very, very useful for what Todd wants to do, right? Todd loves to run counter. And in order to run counter, you need guys who can block on the line of scrimmage at all 5 positions, obviously, but also at fullback, at tight end. You need guys who can handle spill. The reason you're hearing Pat Ricard a lot is because Pat Ricard is really good at that. And that is something that Todd Monken is going to run. He's run it at a lot of different stops. It's one of his favorite concepts. He can be good at adapting those things if he doesn't have this or that. But if Pat Ricard's available and Pat Ricard's really useful for concepts that he likes, why not go get him? I don't see the issue with that. Rashad Bateman, we'll see what he needs, right? I think the template people have used is like, oh, well, he had Zay Flowers in Baltimore, so he would want Mekhi Lemon. Now, I think there's a little bit more debate to that. I think Carnell Tate is a bit more attractive to Monken than people are going to give it credit for because Todd Monken is also an air raid guy. He's a vertical downfield attack guy. And Carnell Tate is probably one of the better vertical downhill attack prospects in this draft. Maybe you could argue that like Jalen Tyson's size makes him better. But I think all 3 of the wide receivers, Todd Monken can look at and say, hey, I could do something with those guys, right? And I think that's really what you want to have from your coach. You want to give your coach players that he feels like he could put together a plan of success for. And some of the players that people are pointing out, like a Rashad Bateman, who had his best career success under Todd Monken, people are going to gravitate to him because they're going to say, hey, look, Todd could do something with him. So if you already know that Todd can have success with them, then why not go after a player that Todd can do something with? So I think that's part of why you're hearing that, right? It's because Todd was successful in Baltimore, and you want him to have players on the roster he feels like he can have success with. And some of these guys who are available from Baltimore, he's had success with. So I think that's why, people are gravitating towards it. Not that they don't think that he's capable of, creating a new template or his scope being more broad than what the Ravens had to offer on hand. But I think also, some of the players that the Ravens had were really good fits for what he wanted to do, and he's probably going to want to continue that, And also, like, hey, look, it's a new offense. You're going to want some guys who are familiar with it from your last stop there to help teach the offense. I think that's also important as well. You don't want the blind leading the blind. So I get your point, and I think it's a valid question to ask. I think there are some answers out there, though, for some of the questions that you had. Tooth Enthusiast says this. Keep hearing the word accountability come up in press conferences and other things, AB and Haslam, like when they're talking about what they're looking for in a new coach. Is that their way of telling us that there was an accountability issue with Kevin? I wouldn't go that far. I don't think that was the biggest issue with Kevin. I think that Kevin and his style is more suited for a veteran team. And I think as the team got younger, especially on offense, I don't think it's a coincidence that they got worse with Kevin. Kevin is the kind of coach that you would want around a veteran group, right? If you fired your coach because you can't get over, like I thought Baltimore would be a perfect job for him because that's a veteran group. They already have a quarterback. You're not going to have to reinvent the wheel. And Kevin's really good with veteran players. You notice the difference of like players who are willing to go stand 10 toes down for Kevin. They were all veteran NFL players because Kevin's going to give you the trust you want as a veteran player. Kevin's going to give you some leeway here and there. Kevin's not going to just pull you because you do one thing wrong. Kevin's going to let you work through it. And veteran players appreciate that because they know that that's what it takes sometimes. Sometimes that's not great for player development, but it's really good for, your veteran players. So I think that's really what the difference was. Kev's more suited for a veteran roster. They're not a veteran roster anymore. So now, some of the things he's strong at, you need to get somebody else because that doesn't line up with where the team is right now, too. We'll get to more questions, but first I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Talk to you guys real quick about Sleeper, the app for daily fantasy, regular fantasy. And now, if you look at the pick section on the Sleeper app and go to the team section, you have predictions that you can now use on the Sleeper app. You can choose winners of games. So let's say you're a Cavs fan, the Cavs play the Wizards or something like that, and you think the Cavs are going to beat the Wizards, you can pick the Cavs to beat the Wizards in that kind of scenario. For me personally, I went with the Cavs getting the championship this year, and of course, I had to throw in the same for the Cleveland Browns winning the next Super Bowl. So if you want to join in the fun on that, make sure you join the Sleeper app. If you also want to use the Sleeper app for all the other things I mentioned, make sure you use the promo code Worst Take. Get a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code Worst Take. Make sure you join the Sleeper app. All right, this question from TRRTMR says, how is it Q all the way from South Africa? Wow. Asks you with Njoku leaving, you don't think we need a second tight end or you think we need to draft one in free agency? I think we need a blocking tight end. Love your vids, bro. I think the Browns could go after somebody like a Charlie Kohler, maybe even fill out the room with Pat Ricard, who would be a fullback / third tight end. But I think the Browns have the crown jewel of that tight end room, right? Like it was David Njoku. Now it's going to be Harold Fannin. And getting anybody else in there that's going to take snaps away from Harold Fannin, I think is going to make the offense worse. So just having guys who can complement him becomes the focus. I think Charlie Kohler would take a promotion here in Cleveland. He would be a second tight end. He's usually a third tight end. And then you get Pat Ricard to do all the Pat Ricard stuff. And you could fill out the tight end room pretty nicely while having a lot of experience to guide the young guy in that room. So I think that's probably where they're going to solve it. It's a good tight end class, like for day 3. I just don't think they want to add another rookie to that room. I think there's some positions you want to keep older. There's some positions you want to keep younger. Running the ball is going to be so core to what they want to do, and tight ends are going to be so important when you're running as much counter as the Cleveland Browns are going to run that I think they want to keep that position as veteran as possible. Next one comes from BG, the one who says, yo, Q, what's up? I have a question about positional versatility in the NFL. Haven't been watching the NFL super long, but I was wondering if it's possible for somebody on the defensive line to switch over to the offensive line. how difficult of a transition would that be? In other sports, we see position changes more often, but not as much in football. Thank you. Have a good one. Actually, back in way back in the day before face mask, football kind of was like that, where the line would be the line, defensive and offensive. And over the years, football has kind of developed into the most specialized sport there is because of how they handle substitutions, right? Other sports, you can't substitute as frequently as you can in football. Football, you can substitute at the break of every play. And if you look at, I think John Boyce or somebody on YouTube did a great video about this. But if you look at the body types that were in the NFL, for a long time, it was like regular body types. And then they introduce a rule where you can make unlimited substitutions, I think is the rule, right? You can go unlimited substitutions. I think it was actually an SB Nation video or Secret Base now. And that rule changed football because all of a sudden you didn't have to have the same guys on the defensive line, on the offensive line. You didn't need two-way players anymore. You can specialize positions, and that just exploded how big some people are and how specific the body types are. Football is probably the most, how do I put this? Football is probably the most rigid positionally sport that there is. Like, there's very little flexibility in different position groups, and it's very rigid. Linebackers play linebacker, right? Safeties play safe. There's not a lot of movement or fluidity there. Whereas you look at a basketball, right, for example, there's a ton of fluidity there. Guys play different positions on offense and defense. Sometimes guys are wings. Sometimes guys are guards. Sometimes guys play the 5 or the 4. It's a very flexible and fluid sport. Football is a lot more rigid. So to your question, right, now that we got the history lesson behind why the NFL is like this versus other sports, to your question about the defensive line and guys switching over from defensive line to offensive line, it happens every once in a while. I think we talked about Pat Ricard in this video. I believe he was a defensive lineman at one point in his career, and then he switched over to offensive line. It happens, but it's not as common just because since the NFL is such a specialized sport, the skill gap between somebody in the NFL learning to play on the offensive side for the first time versus the guys that they be going up against is just too high, right? I think you have a chance to do this in college where the skill gap wouldn't be that major, but trying to do that in the NFL, it just requires too much out of the person trying to learn. And I think that's the biggest reason you don't see that much of it anymore. The NFL and football in general has become far too specialized for position changes to happen like that. Hell, we're seeing on the offensive line, guys struggle to go from right guard to left guard, right? That is how specialized these positions and specific and rigid these positions have become. So yeah, I think that's the biggest hurdle in seeing more of that. This is the last question that comes from Adam. It says this: Hey Q, from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And I was wondering if you think there's any chance we draft a quarterback in this year's draft that doesn't matter what round. I think there's a chance that they might draft the quarterback later in the draft, but early, I don't think that's where the Browns are thinking right now. Is it something that they could do, get a Drew Aller or a Kate Klubnik later in the draft maybe? It's similar to the thought process that landed him Shador, where Shador was sitting there in the 5th and they were like, well, the value's too high, so let's take him. I think something similar can happen with Drew. Something similar can happen with Cade. The Browns are more than willing to have a ton of quarterbacks on the roster. They demonstrated that last year. And unfortunately, they've had to play a lot of those quarterbacks. So I don't think it's wild to think that they could draft a quarterback. I personally don't really see a need for them to do it, but, they don't have one, so they'll keep drafting until they have one. But thank you for the question, Adam. You guys have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.